G'day everyone, we're up to number 5 in my top 20 albums countdown, and this is going to be perhaps considered the rogue entry. I think most of the other albums in this upper echelon of this list pretty well known. This band only well known in this country if you are a bit of a rock pig. They've been around a long time, since 1984 in fact. But I make no apologies for having this band and this album this high, because this is absolutely one of the go-to albums in my collection. I'm talking about The Mark of Cain, and their album is the 4th album that they did, called This Is This, which was released about halfway through 2001. I love these guys. They are a 3-piece band from Adelaide. John Scott, lead guitarist, songwriter. His brother Kim Scott, bass player. They've had a succession of drummers. No Spinal Tap jokes, please. But I think they really found, if there was a missing link, they found it with the drummer who played on this album, and that was John Stanier, who, if you're into American rock, you may have heard of. He was the drummer for Helmet, pretty big band throughout the 1990s. He's been in other bands too. Battles is another band he's been with. He played with Tomahawk along with Mike Patton from Faith No More. But Stanier, in my view, is one of the greatest drummers of all time. He just hits the skins incredibly hard, but he just has an incredible sense of rhythm. He's like a metronome, and he really tightened up the other two, I felt, on this album. And it's a killer album. The other big winner on this record, in my view, is the production. And I guess it fulfills most of the elements I'm looking for in hard rock music, in that it's heavy as anything, but it's not muddy. It's a really clean and crisp production. Andy Gill from the Gang of Four was one of the producers on this album, and really kicked some goals with the sound that they came up with. It is so clean and crisp and sharp, you could cut yourself with it. I used to say that when I put the disc in the CD player. Yeah, that's how long ago it was released. Really interesting band, Mark of Cain. You know, they've always maintained their regular work commitments, so often it's been a long wait between albums. The previous album they had some success with, Ill at Ease, that came out in 1995. Tell Me was a pretty well-known song off that one. First Time, another one. But it was 6 years before they released This Is This, and then it would be subsequently another 11 years till they released their next album, which meant that I was having to play this one for a long time, which was fine, because I still play this all the time. If you're looking for similarities, if you haven't heard of The Mark of Cain, probably the closest one that comes to mind is that band I mentioned that John Stanier was in, Helmet. It's hardcore, probably. Mostly hardcore. It takes elements of metal, elements of punk. You know, there's certainly some up-tempo, speedy songs in the repertoire. But it's that cleanness and tightness that really appeals to me. And they are an incredible act live. If you ever get the chance, they don't play all that frequently, but The Mark of Cain are an amazing live act. Certainly one of the best I've ever seen. The first song I heard off this album was the first single, Familiar Territory, which I think is just, it's my favourite Mark of Cain track. It's just a killer. It starts off at 1,000,000 miles a minute with a great riff. It's dark and brooding and aggressive. Look, this whole album's like that, so if that's not your cup of tea, you're probably not going to be interested. If you do like that sort of stuff, you are going to dine out in this, because the whole album is like that. It doesn't mean it sounds similar. There's a lot of different sounds encompassed in it. Some quite slow, laid-back stuff. One track in that vein that comes to mind is One Day Late in December, which is fairly laid-back and slow tempo, but still has that menacing undertone. Kim Scott is a wonderful bass player. Great bass player to watch too. He's got that really low-slung bass. Looks like he's holding it about a foot off the ground. John Scott, almost spoken word vocals in parts. He can sing, he's a fine singer. But it really sort of adds to the dynamic they create, which is, you know, to be honest, it's one of angst. The themes are, they're certainly intrigued by war. They write about war themes quite a lot. One of the songs on this album is called Lone Pine. They've, over the years in previous albums, made a lot of references to war and soldiers. Point Man, for example, is a song of theirs off the previous album, Ill at Ease. But this, I'd say this is probably their most commercially accessible album, because Familiar Territory certainly appealed on a broader hard rock level, I'd say. That's followed up by Retaliate, which also might have been a single, I think. Great film clip for it. Very dark film clip, but again, a real sledgehammery sound, followed up by Second Hander. Again, quite, for them, quite an accessible rock sound, always underpinned by just a fantastic rhythm section. The bass from Kim Scott and John Stoney's drums just combine beautifully, and the guitar over the top. You know, look, they're only three-piece, but for a three-piece band, they get an incredibly full sound. Side one of the album continues with Let Chaos Rule Supreme, and the song is, as the title suggests, it's pretty chaotic song that just builds to a fantastic crescendo. Lone Pine comes next. Token is one of my favourite tracks. It's a bit of a, I guess you could call it a love lament, but certainly not sung in that forlorn love style you might expect. Again, it's pretty brooding, and towards the end there's a tempo change, and it builds up to an incredibly fast break with one of the most amazing pieces of drum fill I've ever heard from Stania. He is really an amazing drummer. Sleep, another very accessible track, but heavy as anything. I mentioned One Day in December. Knocking. Outsider, again, in that, you know, look, virtually every song on this, I think, was quite radio friendly, where our radio station's still actually playing rock music. Lockdown, again, is a bit of a favourite. That's a slower sound, but has a really sort of anthemic type chorus, and then it finishes with a real, almost punky, hard to describe, but a really loud sort of, you know, suitable closing track, which has cut him down. Actually starts with some audio of, I think, an American military commander in Vietnam who's spotted some Vietnamese snipers and orders his men to open fire on them. There's actual audio of that going on at the start of the song. It is as heavy as anything, this album. So again, if you're after hard rock, heavy rock, this is your baby. But again, what I like about it is it's not heavy metal as such. It's not punk as such. It's not strictly hardcore. I think it takes the best elements of all those genres and just delivers it in one very powerful, powerful record. Great band, great album. This is one of my favourites. I know a lot of people there won't necessarily have heard it, but I strongly urge you to give it a try, because it's a killer. And if you like pretty heavy rock and roll, I would be surprised if you didn't like this. So that's number 5. It's The Mark of Cain. This is this. Give it a listen sometime. I'll be back soon with number 4 in my top 20 albums countdown.